Door is open.
Perfect. Oh, there's Jonathan.
Oh, we got Jonathan.
Perfect timing.
How are you?
Thank you so much for making it. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Hello, Jonathan. How are you?
Dr. Williams, how are you?
I'm doing good. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. What do we know about how Mike is doing?
Seems to be doing okay. I talked to him this morning, actually. You know, he's got a lot on his plate, obviously, but he seems to be doing okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sad for him. I'm sure it's hard.
Yeah. Second brother in a couple of years.
It's tough. It's tough. Well, it's nice to see all of you. I don't know most of you, actually, only Aaron, I believe, but thank you for having me here today. I hope I can be useful.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in this tough time, it's good to have everybody in, the Ram Brown extended family and all of the scholar. So again, we know that whenever we call on you, you always are the first to answer. So really appreciate it. So let's get started. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us. My name is Sam Alamayo. I'm a 2003 Ram Brown scholar and a board of trustee. I chair the development committee on the Ram Brown board. Today, I'm co-hosting with my fellow board of trustee, Meredith Eggers. Meredith, please say hi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. It's an important time.
So we have quite a lot of attendees that have joined us right now. First of all, I would like to thank the fantastic lineup of speakers that are here to talk about a key topic, which is leadership in a time of change and leadership for change. And first and foremost, I want to introduce everybody to the Ram Brown Scholar Program, which is a scholarship and community development program that was established in honor of Secretary Ram Brown, the first African-American Secretary of Commerce, who has touched the life of many, many people throughout his lifetime as the chair of the Democratic Party, as well as the Secretary of Commerce. When his life was tragically ended, the scholarship program was started to continue the legacy of Ram Brown and to make sure that his spirit of public service, as well as transformational change, would continue in the next generation of African-American leaders. I have been the beneficiary of the Ram Brown Scholar Program, and it has truly transformed my life. So when it was time for me to get involved by giving back, as well as actively engaging, the Ram Brown Scholar Program was the place for me to start with. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers. And then we will start with questions for them to get their initial ideas, and we will open it up quickly to question and answers. You can ask your questions in the chat, and feel free to also let us know from what part of the country and what part of the world you're joining us from. Aaron Williams is the 18th director of the U.S. Peace Corps, and was appointed by President Obama and served from 2009 to 2012. Jonathan Greenblatt, and both of them are Board of Trustees at Ram Brown, is the CEO and the 6th National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Morgan Harper is a 2001 Ram Brown Scholar, alumni. Morgan is an advocate of economic equality. She was with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and most recently put on a fantastic congressional campaign for the 3rd Congressional District of Ohio. Damian Williams is an assistant United States attorney with the Southern District of New York. Jennifer Ali is a Minnesota-based, actually Minneapolis-based holistic health practitioner and social activist. And I'll hand it over to Meredith, and we'll go from there.
Sam, I think you're asking the first question.
Oh, okay, sure.
So you get to ask the first question.
Yeah, so the first question is for each one, and I'll start with you, Aaron. Is tell us kind of from your perspective, and you put together such a fantastic op-ed about kind of calling on leadership and leadership in the public sector. For all of you, the question is kind of what, in this time of change, how can we make sure that we're not just staying outraged, but how can we take this outrage and turn it into leadership for change?
Okay, thanks, Sam. Let me just say, and to start off that, first of all, I want to thank you and Meredith for organizing this event. You did this very quickly, and I know this is going to be the first of many successful salons that the Ron Brown family will put on. And I want to address my remarks today to the scholars and the captains and the young alums who are starting their careers. The people on the panel with me today are already veterans. They've already launched their careers and are very successful. First of all, as I was watching this tsunami sweep across the United States of this multi-ethnic, multi-generational group of protesters who were determined to protest and demonstrate for justice and fight against inequality, I thought that, as this was especially important and resonated with me as a career public servant in many ways, that they were performing an extraordinary public service for America. They, in a way, in a very broad-based way, were reaching out to tell Americans that now what we have been suffering for centuries in this country, systematic racism, is no longer acceptable. And it's no longer acceptable not just to Black and brown people, people of color, but to everyone, every citizen in this country. And that, I think, makes this a pivotal change in where we are today. I can't hear you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for that. And Jonathan, can you follow on that?
Look, I think that, I would first of all just thank you, Samuel and Meredith, for organizing this too. I'm so proud to be with my fellow panelists. And, 25 years ago, I worked for Ron Brown at the Commerce Department, and he was a mentor to me. And I can't tell you, I've said this before to Mike Mallory many times actually, but every time I see the incredible people who come together as part of this fund, I can't tell you how proud the secretary would be. Like, honestly, it makes me want to cry when I think about what it would mean to him. So I got to pull it together. And now today, 25 years later, I run the ADL, which is one of the oldest civil rights organizations in the country. We call ourselves the oldest anti-hate organization in the world. And I think what you've seen, this expression on the streets, is this incredibly inspiring movement against hate, against the systemic racism that has plagued this country for centuries and centuries. And it's mutated and it's evolved. But to see, as Aaron said, this multiracial, multi-generational movement where people are saying enough, I just think it's profoundly moving. And, I'm optimistic. I mean, I think, COVID has been horrific. The impact of COVID on communities of color has been disproportionate and devastating. I think the economic consequences of COVID will be long lasting. And the death and the murder of George Floyd and the killing of Breonna Taylor after Ahmaud Arbery, it's just like, it's enough. But to see what sprung out of it and to see this movement, again, in the darkness, I'm finding just a little bit of light, and let's hope we can turn that little bit of light into a beacon, into a new tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then Morgan, I'm going to come to you. For leadership for change, and you've been working with economic equity as well as getting involved in politics. What are you feeling?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone for including me on the panel. Happy to be here today. So I have a lot of thoughts. It's interesting timing that this is happening because I recently, as you referenced, Sam, wrapped up a grassroots campaign for Congress here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm based. And the whole theory of the case behind that wasn't that, I dreamed of being a congresswoman as a little girl or anything like that. It really was, seeing this disconnect between policy and policy making and real people. And if we're going to do something about that and see more transformative policy that people really feel an impact from in their lives, it's going to take more political participation and people really holding leaders accountable. And that was a message that we were spreading throughout the 3rd District here in Columbus for several months. And it excited a lot of people, but also was met with a lot of blank stares, because I think there has been quite a lack of activism. I'll speak for, this community directly, though I think we've seen it in a lot of places across the country. And people were sort of like, well, what do you mean we could be doing things differently? And what would more policy changes look like? And, the coronavirus and the policy response to that, I think also then started to wake people up a little bit, like, well, wait a second, things can change quite drastically. And when pushed, our institutions can address that change, right? And do very big things very quickly. So add that on top of now the frustration around police violence, which isn't new, and the policy responses to that aren't unknown by any means, but there has been a lack of political will and political leadership to really push to get change there, and connecting to larger issues of systemic racism. So I share the sentiment that a lot of the other panelists have already of hope and optimism and honestly excitement in some ways around just seeing the level of activity and how long it's already sustained, and how much incoming I'm getting from people here on the ground who are organizing protests for the first time, and seeing their transition over even 2 weeks of attending and being a little bit nervous about being there to now, hey, Morgan, I'm about to have 500 people show up on Saturday. Can you come? That's what it takes to have an active country where we are engaged in holding leaders accountable, and what I do think will bring us closer to true justice moving forward as well.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Damien, I'm going to come to you, and because the legal system has been one of kind of the target areas where people are hoping to see justice and to see change. And what does leadership for change means to you right now?
So it means a bunch of things. I mean, I exist in this space where I am both someone who I think is, I'm defined by my role as an inside person. I'm a Black man in the Department of Justice, and there are not that many of me. That is a frustrating experience on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, I recognize that my role in this moment and prior moments really requires me to be there on the inside at the table to represent as well as I possibly can, and to keep pushing. But leadership for change, I think, is much broader than that. I mean, I think if we want to change and improve upon the criminal justice system, you have to define public service as being beyond the folks who are in the room. Organizing is a public service. Activism is a public service. Marching is a public service. Voting is a public service. And so while I see myself as a public servant, I work for the government, I try to do my best every single day. Being inside the room doesn't mean that you can't also, be on the street. Those two things are not inconsistent. And I think it's going to take folks engaging on every possible level to sustain the momentum that society has seen in the past couple of weeks. Because, I think one of the biggest enemies of change is inertia. That slowing things down, tiring you out, waiting to outlive the moment, that is the enemy of change. And so, figuring out how to sustain the momentum is going to be one of the critical things that I'm really worried about, frankly. I'm optimistic, but I'm also worried about, because I haven't seen many historical examples in recent history. I'm thinking about post-Sandy Hook, for instance. If we couldn't change gun laws in the aftermath of little kids getting killed, right, and a national tragedy, what makes us think that this moment is going to be different, and what are we going to do to make the moment different? So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but I'm also really focused on and interested in ways in which we as a society can broaden the definition of public service so that we have as many hands on deck to push change in the direction we want to take it.
No, absolutely. I think that's really powerful. Last but not least, you're smack in the center of it in Minneapolis right now. And with your background as a healthcare practitioner, COVID happened. That was, terrifying, and then once in a century type of event. And now this. What are you feeling like, and what does kind of leadership for change mean to you?
Yeah, so I'm sitting here in Southside Minneapolis in the Powderhorn neighborhood. I live about 10 blocks away from George Floyd was murdered. I could hear the protests from outside my window. And it's very ironic to be here because about 10, 15 years ago, I was working with the United Nations in the Democratic Republic of Congo, reading Octavia Butler, and never thought that in my lifetime I would see this outside my window, the kind of just burning and smelling it in the air, and that's just the fear that's everywhere. And then to watch on TV how this has spread around the country, and to kind of get out of my own bubble and realize, oh my gosh, this is a spark that started here but has gone so many other places. And then now what, right? So about 3 years ago, I was a part of a group that created something called the Minnesota Healing Justice Network. So we're a mutual aid community of 100 community healers of color. We have all different types of healthcare practitioners, whether that's midwives, doulas, body workers, therapists, herbalists, right? And we're all of color. And a lot of us are young. I'd say we span from like 18 to in 30s, and then we have like elder advisors. So, I think, so I lived in New York for 10 years after my public health master's. And so when I came back to Minnesota, the reason I decided to come back here, even though I love all of the Ron Brown, family out east, Minneapolis is ridiculously and kind of secretly very progressive. There's a lot of kind of cultural and political experimentation that happens here that really has stayed under the radar. I have loved staying here because I've gotten to build this mutual aid network, and there has been kind of wealth redistribution efforts happening locally. We have Andrea Jenkins, who was, all over the news a couple of weeks ago as the first Black trans woman, who is now who's the vice president of our city council, very instrumental in the vote that happened a few days ago to defund the Minneapolis Police Department, who are still grappling with what that means for our city. But what is happening here is super experimental, is the word. I just can't say it any other way. It's kind of ironic that this happened in the Powderhorn community that has a long history of progressive politics. And so for going into the future, I think we need spaces where we can experiment with how do we do things differently. I think we need to think about really what does wealth redistribution mean and look like? How can that happen in a way that addresses the concerns, but also gets to the root of the fact that we have so much economic inequality in this country? I think we need to really look at mutual aid networks and how do we embed, rather than just having like neighborhood associations, how do we embed reviving those kind of old-timey values when neighbors knew each other and could help each other and could protect each other. We've had to do that here when we had white supremacists. We were afraid our houses were going to start burning as well as the buildings. So we had mass meetings and, text chains going across from block to block so that, if a gas station, next a few blocks down started going up in flames, we could be in touch and we could be watching out for our neighbors. So like these old time values that also are very Midwestern in a way has helped us protect our city. And I'm just saying, we had many businesses burned down, but really we could have been slaughtered, and we are really surviving. So I want to also reframe all this is that Minneapolis is full of survivors and full of ideas, to be honest. So I'll leave it there and we could talk more.
Samuel, could I just add a follow-up comment?
Yes, please.
On what Damien said in terms of what's different now. And Damien, you were very eloquent about talking about we have not learned from the past, we've not moved the needle. And then also piggybacking on what Jennifer said about resiliency and community. I think what's different now is that in the past, when you had the civil rights movement and other movements across the country, I think we relied on the federal government to take action in a sweeping way. Now you see mayors, governors, community activists, NGO leaders, corporate leaders who are stepping forward, and they're saying we are going to make change within our own organizations. And that is a major difference from what we've seen in the past. So that's why I'm actually optimistic about that, because you see people now on the front lines who you never would have seen before on the front lines, because they believe that now we have to make a difference because our society is really in peril. So I think that's the difference. And the other thing is that because of what you see in Minneapolis with the mayor and the city council and community leaders, I think that's happening in so many municipalities, large and small across the country, even in places that you would not expect to see it. And so I feel optimistic because of that.
No, that's wonderful. And I want to encourage participants to start kind of putting in their questions in the Q&A section as well. Meredith?
So I think to your point, I think that the overriding feeling that many people, especially in our generation, are seeing is hope, because we've seen the failures so many times before, and this is different. It feels different. We feel optimism. The question I keep getting from a lot of people is, okay, great. The Aarons and the Morgans, you all are doing things to change the world. What can individuals do right now to make a difference? And I know we can vote, but feel free to be very frank about what everybody who looks every single way can do right now. Aaron, you want to start?
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Meredith. Well, I think obviously we have to vote. That's right. And that is a major exercise in America. If you look at the percentages of people who vote in this country compared to everywhere else around the world. You know, I served as head of USAID in South Africa for a number of years during the Mandela administration, and people stood in the rain, the wind, the sun, desperate to vote, no matter how many hours it took, because they realized that was a privilege and an important right to exercise. But I think we need to be represented, Meredith. You know, going back to what we talked about a couple of minutes ago, the reason why we are able to make a difference now in so many different organizations, because you have leadership in the right places who are going to make a difference. And so we need to be in leadership positions. We need to be in the arts and medicine and law. We need to have more Damians in the Department of Justice. We need to obviously be in the large NGOs, the foundations. We need to represent America around the world. We need diplomats. And when you're in those positions, so therefore I would say when you're in those positions, not only do you need to look for ways to be effective and to move forward with the mission of your entity, but also you need to look for ways to promote change. You need to be a catalyst for change within your organization. You know, that's what I've always tried to promote wherever I've worked with my colleagues. It's really crucial to do that. If you're in the room, you have to make a difference. You can't merely do your job and do well and make a decent living for you and your family. You also need to try to change society. And this is a time for us to do that. That's why, you know, I would encourage the scholars who are going to be different from people of my generation who perhaps worked at one place for a number of years. They're going to have multiple careers. They're going to work in multiple places. Make a difference everywhere you work. This is really important.
So one example that's pretty concrete that I think could apply in a lot of different contexts that I've seen here on the ground in Columbus, because like we've already talked about, I mean, this is expanded beyond just the issue of police brutality into larger questions of systemic racism and how it plays out in different contexts in different communities. And here in Columbus, there's, you know, a very affluent, almost entirely white, I would estimate it, no exaggeration, 98 to 99% white suburb here, Upper Arlington. And I have a friend who is Black, living in that community, organized a protest, Black Lives Matter protest. And she had about 6 people that were with her when she started it. And the day before they were going to do it, it dropped off to just 2. Just the Black people were left. So all the white people got kind of nervous and dropped off, saying that they were getting threats from people in their community. But they pushed forward, and they're actually going to be doing, you know, bigger banners and more protests and all of that. So, I mean, I think there are ways, even if it doesn't feel quite as directly on the front lines of every neighborhood, every institution we're a part of, where we start to challenge people a little bit. Well, we should feel comfortable at this point saying Black Lives Matter. And if we don't, why don't we? And what does that say about our culture? And maybe we need to start, you know, weeding out some of the people who are in that culture that don't align with our values. But if we never push it, then we don't quite know. So I think there's a lot that individuals can do, and that's been encouraging just to see how this is playing out in different contexts and how people are choosing to tackle the issue of systemic racism.
I have one comment to make about, you know, something that folks can do. You know, I know there are many people who struggle with the question, do they join the government? right? Like, is there space for them in the federal government, state government, local government, et cetera? And in particular, in the world that I inhabit as a federal prosecutor, is there space for people, for Black and brown folks? And to me, the answer is unambiguously yes, although the question is an understandable one for people to ask. But I think what a lot of these moments really underscore is, if you want justice for a man like George Floyd, you're going to need to have a dedicated principal prosecutor who is going to do his or her absolute best to make sure that the victim's rights are vindicated. And as hard as it can be to see yourself, operating in a space within the criminal justice system, because sometimes it's not, always operating at its absolute best. It's necessary because we need people who are thoughtful and careful and empathetic. Because I can tell you on a day-to-day basis, my days are filled with making decisions that impact people's liberty. I am cognizant of how much power and authority that comes with and how much damage you can do if you're not careful. And so we need to flood the system with people who believe that decisions that are that weighty need to be done with care. And that sometimes in a prosecution, the thing that you should do is to do nothing at all, for instance, right? The decision to charge or not charge, to give a plea deal or not. These are incredibly important decisions, and you need thoughtful, careful, empathetic people making them. And so if you, in these moments, are wondering, like, I'm going to law school, could I see myself, working for the, Minnesota State AG? That Keith Ellison, the answer is hopefully yes. Even if you struggle to get there, and even if you have to ask tons of questions to understand what that life would be like. It's the same way we look at the military. You don't want a whole bunch of folks who want to go to war, right? That's why they sign up for the military. That's not the way that we should be looking at those institutions. People who value peace are the ones who also should be occupying those positions. And so I think for folks out there who are thinking of becoming lawyers, don't just think of yourself as someone who is going to be attacking the system, but think of yourself as someone who can potentially reform the system from the inside and be the decision maker.
That's wonderful.
Yes, if I could piggyback on that.
You too. Yeah, please. And we want to hear from Jonathan and you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely what Aaron Williams has said and what Damien Williams has said. So with our Healing Justice Network, we have a solidarity network on the side, which is all allies. I asked them a few days ago for their meeting to look at this video, and maybe some of you have seen the video going around. It's gone pretty viral. It's a image of maybe 15 or 20 white men on their knees, kneeling, praying for forgiveness as a group, like a Black woman and a Black man and a few other Black folks stand in front of them and receive this. I think that's really, a controversial image in a lot of ways, depending on how you feel about religion and prayer and this kind of power differential. But if you watch that video, that's something that is really very impacting, to see an image of white folks, men especially, on their knees with Black men and women standing in front of them. Just from watching that, I felt something in my body, something shifting. And it made me really beg the question, when we ask the question, what can we do? Are white people asking that question from a place of being on their knees and asking? Yes. For asking to be told and to receive information and a vision, right? If it can't be another project that you're leading, it has to be like a very patient and, mindful, what do you need, right? And white, and so folks of color, Black folks, and I'm seeing this in Minneapolis, I keep telling people, are you standing yet? Because if you're not standing yet, we need you to stand. We need you to be in your power. We need you to be okay with making decisions, knowing that the decisions you make might look different from what has been in the past. I'm being really challenged to think bigger for myself and to think bolder, also being really connected to community and my ancestors, and knowing that I'm not doing this alone, right? So if I take a misstep, someone's gonna hold me back, including on this panel. But I feel really moved at this moment, spiritually moved at this moment, to look inside myself and say, am I standing in my power? What do I need? Who do I need to reach out to get there, to make the ideas that are in my head about justice, about equality, right? About mutuality, about the vision for the future. What is leadership? I need to be asking, how do I get to a place where the things that are in me actually get to live out in the world? And then I'm hoping that my people who are in solidarity with me are listening, because both those pieces need to be together. I'm not advocating for forever an imbalance of power. I think that for me, the vision is that we're all sitting down in a circle. This is my grandfather, who was chief in Nigeria, would have as his council of elders. But that's also the conversation, you know, Representative Barbara Lee is talking yesterday about Racial Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I fully support that. And I would love to experiment with what's happening in Minneapolis around that. And we can't get there unless we have a period of apology and of Black folks standing and white folks asking patiently.
That is a very tough act to follow. So I'm going to be a little more modest, let's be honest, in terms of what people can do. You know, there's a way that we think about it at ADL, and I'll just share the kind of heuristic that we use. If you want to do something in the face of hate, if you want to do something in the face of injustice, I think about it kind of three ways. Number one, speak up. Speaking up matters so much. There's so many people who think their voice doesn't count. But whether it's a comment you hear, like in a Zoom meeting, as it were, or at a dinner table, or a comment you see on Facebook, or a tweet, like flag it, or report it, or we have to interrupt intolerance if we want to stop this wheel from continuing to turn. So speaking up matters. And by the way, speaking up can be taking a knee. Speaking up can be showing up at that protest. You can speak up in lots of ways. Secondly, share facts. We have a president who can't spell, let alone tell the truth.
Yeah.
Who uses racism as a political weapon again and again and again and again. And I don't really care how you vote. I don't really interested in what your political affiliation. Authoritarianism and militarism and paranoia are the enemies of us all.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say share facts, we got to stick to the facts. And that's why I admire so many of the protesters have been peaceful despite the lunacy that you're hearing about them. Like, come on, it's just not true. Sharing facts means evidence-based, data-driven, bring it down a notch, but that doesn't prevent us from showing our outrage. That doesn't prevent us from yelling as loud as we can. But again, we just can't resort to the tactics that those who advocate injustice and want to perpetuate systems of oppression continue to use. And again, if you're a white ally like me, you got to get educated. You can't just show up. You better show up again, ready to listen and to learn. And then thirdly, I think you got to show strength. Man, you got to lean in. And Damien talked about, first Aaron and then Damien talked about public service. What Morgan's doing, organizing, that is public service. What Yotu's doing, that is public service. That, like, for me, showing strength is about serving. And whether you choose to serve by volunteering for an hour or by showing up for the Ron Brown Scholars Board, or you commit to a career of service like Aaron has done, like Damien has done. Or, by the way, back to something else Damien said, you vote. Voting is a kind of showing strength, showing up at that ballot box. And believe me, this November, if you watch what happened in Georgia 2 days ago, it will not be easy.
Right.
The powers that be will do everything they can to keep you out. But we have got to show up. We have got to lean in. And I'll say one last thing, that when I talk about voting, don't let them fool you. The thing that matters most, it is critical. Political power decides how things work. But don't kid yourselves. It's not only the people like on Capitol Hill have political power. The people on Wall Street have a kind of power. The people running these big corporations have a kind of power. So you can vote with your wallet as much as you vote at the ballot box. You don't have to wait till November the 7th. You can vote every day when you think about how you spend your hard-earned dollars. So speak up, share facts, show strength. That's what I would say.
Wow. Thank you. Morgan, you wanted to say something?
Well, just on the voting point, because I know it's come up a couple of times and then I see it referenced in the categories that Julian put forth. Yeah, I mean, I think this is really important that we actually move beyond just a message around voting to rallying resources to support people actually getting through the entire voting process in a world where voter suppression is rampant and is being memorialized in law, in state laws. Again, taking Ohio as an example, in our primary election, very similar to Georgia in a lot of ways, but just take out the in-person option for voting. Our election was postponed due to the coronavirus pandemic for health reasons, which made sense, but to then move to an all mail-in absentee system when most people aren't really engaging with the US Postal Service all that regularly anymore, have to pay postage to get an application for an absentee ballot, then you understand how that top line vote message starts to fall apart quite quickly and lead to 50% of the turnout that we usually saw here in our primary election. And it looks like we're on track to have something similar or some similar type of system in place for November. So, you know, I was excited. It's kind of a pop culture example, but LeBron yesterday announcing that he's taking on voting as a structurally racist activity and trying to put resources behind that. And that was kind of encouraging. It's like, good, because for a long time, I think we have been in this paradigm of, you know, get out there and vote. And it's like, sure, but there's a lot of barriers to working class people and Black people in particular doing that. And we need to be a lot more strategic. Long-term, great having people who are in positions in state legislature to have a role in crafting the laws. But in the meantime, what's our plan? And I think it's got to be grassroots. I think it's got to be like door to door and hustling to make sure that people have the resources they need to complete the voting process.
You know, that is wonderful. Before we start kind of taking all the questions that are coming in from the attendants, the participants, let me put on one question where anybody from the panelists could answer this. We're seeing this phenomenal outrage that is widespread. How can we make sure, one, it's not hijacked, and two, it is not being used, it's not somehow being used by politicians that have actually no interest in making systemic change, but giving you lip service? How can you identify that systemic change and an institutional change, and how do people push for that? Anybody could jump forward.
I can start.
Yeah.
You know, others can certainly jump in,
Yes.
but I think the vision is number one. If we don't know what we are building, we are just going to tear things down without a plan of what goes in its place. I mean, I think we have a lot of artists, and so there's been a lot of conversation about we need to build gardens and where there's been rubble. And I think, like to the point about kind of stepping into your power and also having quiet to sit and to think about, what does it look like? What does it feel like actual change? What is this new United States that we want to create? Does it mean so we know there's inappropriately distributed resources. Politically, what are we looking for? Economically, what are we looking for? Does it look like the different ways we talk about equity as kind of equalizing versus equitizing, right? With like the kids who are on the stairs. From a public health point of view, I'll stay in that lane and say that it means everyone has access to food that is healthy to support their bodies. Everyone has, is able to sleep. Everyone has like healthy practices and mental health. And so health is not a reason to keep you away from your purpose and your being the best version of yourself. On a public health point of view, in COVID, that was a very interesting test case because we suddenly got to be in some ways a lot healthier nation. We settled down, mental health certainly was up and down, but we started talking about unemployment. People were able to make different decisions about their lives to be healthier in some ways. And we had a whole nationwide conversation about immunity and how do we just be healthier in general as a prevention. So I think taking some of those ideas is a start. But if we don't know what we're building, we won't build it, and someone else will build something else they want to build.
No, absolutely. And anybody else want to add on that, or?
I think we also have to get comfortable disagreeing and in a constructive way. And I'll speak especially within the Black community. In some ways, our campaign was a result of that, we can have different points of view, and it's okay, right? That just because we are used to seeing these same three figures nationally or locally who are the voices for our community, that doesn't mean that young people might have a different point of view. And we are all existing within the same community, but it's possible that we actually have different policy visions for what the future should look like. So, I think that that's important, in making room for that and not trying to tear each other down necessarily, but accept that things have changed and we need to be making room for different types of leaders. Because, as the media, speaking to Damien's point about the inertia, I think the media helps to feed into that inertia by always going to the same types of people, always looking for the same narratives to run. And then sometimes propping up people who are trying to hijack. But we also need to be real about the fact that even some people who we traditionally have accepted as leaders are in their own way hijacking, but hijacking towards inertia. and that needs to be called out as well.
Sam, I think the other thing about that, going back to the original point of the question, is that we need to lay out benchmarks for what we would like to see accomplished. And we need to make sure that, as going back to what Jonathan said, has to be data driven. And we need to publicize, we need to market these ideas in the public square. And then, as Ronald Reagan once said, we can trust, but we need to verify. And verification is part of the process of making sure that you publicize and push for the benchmarks that you put in place. That's absolutely crucial. And you need to do this through coalitions and alliances across sectors that perhaps have not worked together before, right? Teachers, nurses, doctors, firemen, policemen. We really need to bring policemen into this discussion. I've been watching on the news the eloquent statements and thoughts from I think Chief Acevedo in Houston, and your chief of police in Minneapolis. People are coming forward, and we need to tap those kinds of alliances. But we need to have benchmarks so that you can't go back and protest about something that no one knew was a benchmark in the first place.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, you're muted, Meredith.
Sorry, I did that because, as some of you may have noticed, my dog decided to join me for a portion of our talk today. So we've got a lot of great questions coming in. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And in the case that we do not, we will do our best to answer those offline. So please don't be sad if your question is not raised in the next few minutes. And I'm just going to read this straight away. And what I would hope is that maybe each panelist could answer one or two of the pillars. So if one believes that while it is complex, one might be able to perceive systematic racism as being held up by a practice across approximately 6 pillars: the criminal justice system, private life and media, politics and voting, workplace and economic and credit and debt, community education and housing, and healthcare. So if one is trying to help individuals respond, people in regular lives with regular jobs, do something actionable across any one or multiple of those pillars, what would your action recommendation be? And that would be beyond voting and going to protests. Aaron, you want to start?
So I think I got 5 of the 6 pillars, I think. So let me just think about this.
Okay.
So in terms of, let me think about credit first of all. So there are lots of ways to work on credit and debt issues at the grassroots level. One of the things that people probably are not aware of is how eager and interested credit unions are around the country to work at the community level to help tap resources and educate the public, and also work with individuals who have credit challenges. I think you need to reach out to institutions that have the expertise and the resources who can make a difference in that particular sector. That's at least that's in that particular pillar. I think there are ways to do that. Not only that, you've got community banks, and also you've got the behemoths of Wall Street now who are concerned about community backing and how to engage with the community. I saw some very interesting statements coming out from Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan and others at that level of finance. So I think now is the time to reach out and try to figure out ways to approach the people in the financial sector who are interested in trying to change the way we provide credit and the inequality that brown and black people have always suffered in terms of accessing credit.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Anybody want to add or speak to any of the other pillars? Thanks, Aaron.
Well, this is Jonathan. I think it goes without saying you got to vote, as Damien said at the beginning. I think, and you can get involved in politics in lots of different ways. I mean, like at every level. But what we can't do is retreat. I think you got to run into the fight. Again, whether you choose to volunteer, or you choose to vote, or you choose to serve yourself, or you choose just to show up and advocate on issues that you care about. Politicians listen to voters. They pretty much have no choice. So I would suggest to people in ways large and small, you activate the way Morgan has, the way Damien has, the way all these folks have.
On the criminal justice front, some small but important concrete actions folks can take. I think everyone should understand what to do, what their rights are, for instance. I think too many people, even people who have the benefit of tremendous access to education, don't fully understand what their constitutional rights are unless they are lawyers. And I think that knowledge deficit can sometimes end up with terrible consequences when individuals start interacting with law enforcement. And so doing your best not only to know what your rights are, but then teach other people what their rights are, to spread the word, to understand what do you do, what are you allowed to do, what are the police allowed to do. If you are arrested, for instance, what happens, what flows from that. I think education on that level is a really important thing. It may not feel like changing the world, but some of this is also protecting yourself and understanding how to navigate a system that can be opaque and difficult. But I think it's important to do. And then I think, pushing for broader reforms on the state and local level, especially. Public defenders are incredibly under-resourced, and we need more of them, and they need to have more resources. Diversity across police forces and prosecutors' offices is really important. Diversity on the bench, so judges, folks who are going to be imposing sentence on people, can look like the community that they're serving in. All of those things are very important, and you don't have to boil the ocean by trying to do all of them, but just choose a couple, and that in and of itself, I think, is progress.
Excellent. Anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
Well, on the workplace, I think workplace and connects to another question I see on corporate America. Yeah. Not my lane exactly, but I will say what stands out. So for example, today, and I'm sorry, I'm in the 1-bedroom apartment situation of the Zoom call, but what stood out to me in Apple's announcement, for example, because all the companies now are like Black Lives Matter, racial justice, we all care, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, blah, 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 blah. But on Apple's announcement, it's like, oh, you're going to increase the number of contracts that you have with Black suppliers and how you do business. Well, that's very concrete. That connects to economics, and that to me sounds different, right? And so I think that we can also challenge those of us who are working in corporate settings, our leadership on what their response to this moment looks like and what it is moving forward, and that we're not always depending on the federal government to, put a restriction or our local government and the minority and women-owned businesses quotas, that we can take it upon ourselves as leaders in these institutions to decide it's a priority for us to address the racial wealth gap, and we can do our part to get there.
Can I mention one more thing, just really small? I think mentorship is incredibly important. I think there are two, I have very few mentors who look like me. And that is, that I am poorer for that. And so if you are in a position to mentor someone, if you're in a position where you are advancing in a corporation or you're advancing wherever you work, you know, take someone under your wing. That's every time you do something like that, it chips away just a little bit at the power structure that may exclude you or people who look like you. So that's another concrete thing that you can do that bit by bit can help change.
And I think
Meredith,
Damien,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
No, was Jennifer going to speak? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to pass it back to you in a minute, but I just wanted to say very briefly on healthcare and also speaking about corporations. So in the United States, our health insurance system is so much employer-based. So I think we need to have a real serious conversation on the pillar of healthcare about, do we want to continue with employer-based health insurance, or do we want to talk about like universal healthcare that was talked about so much actually in the Democratic debates, and then they just kind of disappeared. And then we had COVID, and it seemed like that perfect time to revive that conversation, and it kind of never regenerated. So I would love to see that conversation regenerated, and also in conversation with corporations, because I don't think though that health insurance stream is not going away, but I think there's a kind of a wedge moment right now to revive that and say, would corporations, you know, even if you are doing employer-based health insurance, would you be able to pay more in, right? Would you, maybe this, and I'm thinking not wealth redistribution in one fell swoop, but what's little pieces of wealth redistribution that, or just equity that can be, you know, worked into different areas. So would you give more? Would you cover more things? I'm a holistic healthcare practitioner. I don't get covered for any of my services. I have to figure that out separately if I'm seeing people of color, because people are paying me for cash. But I'm a person of color that's highly sought after because of the ancestral and kind of the cultural pieces that I bring. I'd have to go back to school to become a chiropractor to be covered under insurance as it is. So really looking at our healthcare system, does it work for us? Are we getting enough therapy? Are we getting enough holistic care? And you know, the public health things that are tried and true. We know how to help things around diabetes, hypertension, stress, you know, healthy nutrition. We know these things, there's oodles of research on it. We don't have the political will to make it happen. So asking those questions and asking corporations maybe to step in if the government can't get there.
To Damien's point, and then I'll go to the next question. I think mentorship is incredibly important. And since I know we've got a lot of college students on the line that may be thinking about finding mentors, don't be afraid to ask someone to mentor you. It's a both ways process. And if there's someone in an organization that you admire or you feel like you can gain insight from, ask them if they'll work with you. Sometimes mentors don't think that they're really the qualified person to help you. So I'd encourage everybody to do that when it seems like the right thing to do. Trying to group a couple of questions together. So excuse me if I don't do it well, but talking about inherent racism in university settings. A couple of universities, specifically Harvard is called out here. And just, I think the general question is, how do we improve, and how do we have a good conversation, and what would anyone make suggestions around regarding racism and having a racism conversation on a college campus?
I'll take a crack at that. So I'm on the board of a couple of colleges and universities, and also a couple of advisory boards. And so what I have seen, even before the recent level of demonstrations across the country, is that universities are great places to form alliances. And both university administrators and university faculty are interested in trying to increase and improve diversity and provide opportunities. But I think sometimes they don't hear the right kinds of questions and concerns expressed by the students. And this is where your alliance can come in. You know, it's one thing to be a gadfly and to pursue something that's a special problem or issue for you. But it's another thing to try to form alliances among student groups and actually present to the administration your list of grievances or concerns that could actually move the needle on that particular campus. I think there's a lot of room for that. You've got student government, you've got interest groups, you know, and you've got time to organize. So that's what I would say.
Anybody else want to take a crack at that one? Thanks, Aaron. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I feel compelled to add one thing to the previous question on one of the pillars.
Yeah.
Politics. And I want to talk about the small P very quickly. In this year of the presidential election, of course, our sights are turned on the presidential election and the senatorial election, and of course, the Congress, the representative election. But we need to make sure that we focus on the small P. We need to look at the city councils, the mayor races, the governor races. We need to look at the school board. We need to look at all the various boards involved in municipal government, regional government. We don't turn out for those elections. So small factions of voting blocks control that in almost every city and town in the country. We need to have 60, 70% of the electorate turn out for the school board, for city council, for aldermen, for whatever it happens to be in your particular area in terms of how you define and identify local government. We don't do that uniformly across our country. We need to develop that culture. That's my small P concern.
I like that.
Absolutely.
Sam, do you have any
Midwestern drivers?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to jump with one question that was listed in there, which is, the big elephant in the room is the pipeline of talent that is coming in and access to equitable education. And one of that problem. So question here is, what are limitations to reforming the K through 12 educational system? Could we ever get to a point wherein property tax is not a major determinant of funding for our schools? Speaks for itself. Because, one of the challenges, we say, because if you look at resources into a lot of communities that are poor, and mostly communities of color have significantly lower budgets overall, and that has been exposed with COVID-19, connectivity, access to online educations, and many other things, and that goes, I guess, as part of the kind of the political campaign and trying to tag along with reforming education. Anything else anybody want to add on education?
I mean, this is maybe a little bit more general than that. I'll just say, I feel your pain, because this is one of the most vexing issues of our country, I would say, and it really exacerbates inequality. But this is a moment where we should be thinking big. And yes, maybe it's a generational process of getting a substantial number of political leaders that are willing to not just make decisions to preserve their political careers, but actually use their positions of power to accomplish as much as possible. But it's an exercise worth going through. And I think if you asked a lot of people, even a month ago, would we ever be having conversations in mainstream media about defunding the police? They would have said no. And here we are talking about reimagining public safety in our communities and whether we should be putting this much money into policing. So, it's not to say that it automatically happens, but I do think a lot of this is just about continuing to make it an issue and having good strategy around how to move the issue forward. And let's try to make it work, because I would say, this is already found to be unconstitutional, and I don't understand why we don't do anything about it. So let's go,
Yeah, sadly, we are getting close to our end, and we want to definitely end it on time for everybody. We really, really want to thank our panelists. If there's anything that you guys want to sneak in, please do. You have 30 seconds.
No.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in just to the point of mentoring. How do we expand the idea of mentoring, not just to be one person to one person? How can we set up how do we shift power in the way that maybe there's a school mentoring another school? Maybe there's a community mentoring another community, right? How do we start to say, we know there's pockets of lack and pockets of excess. How do we start to shift that? Right? Is that sharing? Is that, I don't know. I mean, I'm just here to kind of stoke the imaginatory fire. So sitting with what is possible here. And also I want to say to my Black and brown people, if we don't take a moment to rest, we will not be able to tap into our imaginations. If we are constantly going nonstop, that is going to make us broken. And also we know that when communities have time to become well-resourced and connected, there is less need for police. So coming back to how do we support like our bodies and also find supports from other places in order to shift this entire circle.
No, absolutely right. Take care of yourself. I just want to remind everybody, we will be coming back next week, exactly the same time, with a new set of panelists. Thank you so much for our panelists, for your time, and for the really, really valuable message. Really appreciate it.
And
Thank you,
please share
Sam.
this message
Thank you, Mary.
and
Thank you.
invite others.
Thanks
you.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Good seeing everybody.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
Jennifer,
Nice to
Stay
meet you.
healthy.
take care, Jonathan.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.